Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. The first thing that almost every knitter learns is how to make a slip knot because it's an easy way to start many different cast ons. When you make a slip knot, one part of the yarn, either the working yarn or the yarn tail, will create the loop that's often going to be your first cast on stitch. The other part of the yarn will tighten the knot that's at the base of that loop. Usually, we are more interested in which part of the yarn controls the size of the loop. So that will be the first thing I demonstrate today. Then we'll talk about situations where pulling the working yarn should tighten the loop and situations when it would be better if pulling the yarn tail tightens the loop. Let's get started. Before we begin, if you enjoy our videos, consider joining the pack and becoming a member of thechilidog.com for ad-free access to our entire learning library, priority support, and more. When you want the working yarn to control the loop size, you're going to twist your yarn and make a little loop where the working yarn crosses over the top of the yarn tail. This first loop will be the knot that's at the base of our slip knot. Reach down into that knot and pull a loop of the working yarn through. Then you can tighten the knot by pulling the yarn tail. Finally, the loop can be made larger or smaller by pulling on the working yarn. When you want the yarn tail to control the size of the loop, make a little twist, and this time you want the yarn tail to cross over the top of the working yarn. This first loop will be the knot at the base of the slip knot. Reach down into the knot and pull a loop of the yarn tail through. Then tighten that knot at the base by pulling on the working yarn. Finally, the loop can be made larger or smaller by pulling on the yarn tail. Most of the time, pulling on the working yarn should tighten up that slip knot loop. First of all, it makes things easier because you put the loop onto your knitting needle, and however you cast on, you're naturally going to grip the working yarn to tension it. So as you're doing that, you can just pull and tighten things up and then cast on. If, however, pulling the yarn tail tightens up the loop, things get a little bit more fidgety because you put the loop onto your needle. You naturally are going to grip your working yarn to get started. Pulling on it doesn't do anything to tighten up the loop. And then somehow you need to pull the yarn tail to tighten things up, and it's just not quite as natural of a flow. Also, when the slip knot loop is a permanent part of the fabric structure, where one loop is connected to the next, is connected to the next, and so on, you want the tension of that first loop to be controlled by the working yarn and not by pulling on the yarn tail. Because for some cast-ons, when you go to weave in your yarn tail later, you'll pull on it, and you don't want the size of that first cast-on slip knot loop to change. For this sample, pulling on the yarn tail controls that slip knot loop. So when I go to weave in my yarn tail later, when I pull on the tail, it tightens things up there. The first stitch virtually disappears. And what you end up with is a large knot here, which is not ideal. When your slip knot is a temporary part of the cast on, and it's just there to provide stability as you get started, it doesn't count as your first cast on stitch, and it will be completely removed later. It's usually best if pulling on the yarn tail tightens up the slip knot loop. In this case, I'm going to do a backward loop cast on. Instead of fumbling with trying to hold the tail in place as I cast on the first couple of stitches, I used a tail tightening slip knot to get started, and then I cast on. That slip knot won't count as a cast on stitch later. I'll completely remove it. When I get to the end of my first row of knitting, I can drop the slip knot off my needle, pull on the yarn tail, and the slip knot completely disappears like magic. This type of slip knot also works well with the Turkish cast on and some multicolored or multi-yarn cast ons. Really, any place where that slip knot is temporary, it doesn't count as the first cast on stitch, and it will be completely removed later. I hope you enjoyed learning the secrets of the slip knot. If you did, you can support the Chili Dog and enjoy hundreds of ad-free knitting tutorials by joining our membership site at thechilidog.com. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!